I never thought I'd be sitting here, married for 6 months, reflecting on how my sister Lisa has become the source of so much tension in my life. At 26 years old, I've always tried to keep peace within my family, but it's exhausting when you're constantly treated as the one who owes everyone else. My husband, Andrew, and I are happy, and I was finally starting to feel like I had my life in order, until Lisa managed to turn my world upside down. Lisa is 7 years older than me, and growing up, it always felt like she could do no wrong. Our mom bent over backward for her, no matter the situation. If Lisa needed money, Mom found it. If Lisa needed help with her kids, 3 of them, ages 7, 5, and 3, Mom or I would step in. I've never resented the kids themselves. They're innocent in all of this. But Lisa? She's leaned so heavily on the family for support that it feels suffocating. The expectation was unspoken but clear. I was always supposed to step up. Even with this dynamic, I thought we were fine. I never wanted to rock the boat, so I took on the role of the free babysitter without much complaint. That is, until my wedding. It was the day I'd been dreaming about for years, and I wanted it to be perfect. Simple, intimate, and filled with love. I'd planned everything carefully, even down to how I'd communicate with Lisa to avoid unnecessary drama. But I'd underestimated her ability to ignore boundaries, even when I thought I was being clear. What happened that day started a chain reaction I could never have anticipated. Planning my wedding was one of the most exciting yet stressful experiences of my life. Andrew and I wanted something small and meaningful, just 40 people at the ceremony, surrounded by our closest family and friends. We envisioned a serene, intimate moment to exchange our vows without distractions. Everything about the day was carefully planned, from the flowers to the seating arrangements, and I was determined to avoid any unnecessary chaos. One decision we made early on was to keep the ceremony kid-free. It wasn't anything personal against anyone's children, including Lisa's. It was simply about creating the atmosphere we wanted. Kids can be unpredictable, and I wanted to ensure that all eyes and ears were on the ceremony, not on temper tantrums or restless little ones. The reception, however, was a different story. Kids were more than welcome to join the celebration after the vows. When I broke the news to Lisa, I tried to be as gentle and considerate as possible. I explained that it wasn't about her children, but about keeping the ceremony focused on Andrew and me. Her reaction, though, was immediate and explosive. She called it ridiculous and accused me of excluding her family. Her anger caught me off guard, especially since I thought the compromise, letting the kids come to the reception, was more than reasonable. For a moment, I felt guilty, wondering if I was being too rigid. After days of back and forth, Lisa finally relented with a dismissive, "Fine, whatever, do what you want." Her tone stung, but I chose to let it go. I was too focused on making the wedding day perfect to dwell on her attitude. I assumed the issue was resolved, trusting that she would respect my wishes. Little did I know, Lisa wasn't done with her protests yet, and her apparent acceptance would later prove to be nothing but words. Lisa's initial resistance to my no kids rule wasn't just a passing objection. It was a full-blown campaign to make me reconsider. For weeks leading up to the wedding, she made snide comments about how family should come first and how unreasonable I was being. "You know how hard it is to find childcare for 3 kids, she'd say, as if I hadn't already considered that. Each time, I calmly reminded her that the kids were welcome at the reception, just not the ceremony. But no matter how I phrased it, Lisa seemed determined to twist my words into a personal attack. The worst part was how she involved our mom in the situation. Suddenly, it wasn't just Lisa I was dealing with. It was Mom calling me with thinly veiled guilt trips. "Lisa's kids are part of the family, honey," she'd say. "What kind of message are you sending by excluding them?" It felt like no one cared about what I wanted for my own wedding. Instead, the focus shifted entirely to accommodating Lisa. At one point, Lisa even suggested that I change the structure of the ceremony altogether to make it more kid-friendly. She threw out ideas like shortening the vows or allowing the kids to sit with her at the front. Each suggestion was met with a polite but firm no. I knew compromising on this would set a precedent I wasn't willing to live with. Eventually, Lisa's complaints simmered down, and she agreed to follow the rule. Though her tone made it clear she was doing so grudgingly, I felt relieved, thinking the matter was finally settled. In hindsight, I should have known better. Lisa's quiet acceptance wasn't a resolution. It was a warning of what was to come. The morning of my wedding was everything I'd hoped it would be: calm, joyful, and filled with love. As I got ready with my bridesmaids, I felt a mix of nerves and excitement bubbling up. The ceremony was set to take place outdoors, under a canopy of blooming flowers. Andrew and I had poured so much thought into every detail to make the day feel uniquely ours, and I couldn't wait to walk down the aisle. Guests began to arrive, and I felt a wave of gratitude seeing all the familiar faces there to celebrate with us. When I spotted Lisa entering without her kids in tow, I exhaled with relief. Maybe all the drama had been for nothing. Maybe she really had decided to respect my wishes. The ceremony was about to begin, and everything seemed to be falling into place. Standing at the altar, holding Andrew's hands, I felt a sense of serenity wash over me. This was the moment I'd dreamed of. The officiant began speaking, and I could feel the emotions welling up in my chest. But then, as if on cue to shatter that perfect moment, a piercing scream echoed through the garden. Heads turned, and my heart sank. There, near the back, was Lisa, frantically trying to calm her 3-year-old son, who was in full meltdown mode. I froze. My vows were interrupted, the flow of the ceremony broken. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. Lisa had brought her kids despite everything. My face burned with a mix of embarrassment and anger, but I forced myself to stay composed. I focused on Andrew, determined not to let this ruin my day. When the ceremony ended, I made a beeline for Lisa. The anger I had pushed down during the vows was now at the surface. I couldn't understand why she had disregarded my wishes. Her laughter in response, her actual laughter, made it all worse. The moment the ceremony ended, I wasted no time pulling Lisa aside. My heart was pounding, not just from the adrenaline of the vows, but from the sheer disbelief at her audacity. I tried to keep my voice calm, though the frustration was evident. Lisa, we talked about this. I was clear, no kids at the ceremony. Why did you bring them? She rolled her eyes and gave a dismissive laugh. Oh, come on, you didn't really mean it. They're family. Everyone loves seeing kids at weddings. Her tone was light, almost mocking, as if my feelings on the matter were irrelevant. I was stunned. Did she think this was funny? That her blatant disregard for my wishes could just be brushed off with a laugh? I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. It wasn't up for interpretation, Lisa. I meant what I said. This was important to me, and you disrespected that. Her expression shifted to one of annoyance. You're overreacting. Kids make noise. It's normal. You're being dramatic. At that point, I could feel the heat rising in my cheeks. It wasn't just about the noise. It was the principle. I'd set a boundary, and she'd bulldozed right over it. Lisa, it's not just about the noise. It's about respecting the one thing I asked for on my wedding day. Before she could respond, my mom appeared, clearly having overheard the conversation. Sweetheart, she began in that overly soothing tone she always used to placate me. Kids will be kids. Lisa didn't mean any harm. Don't let this ruin your day. I could hardly believe it. Instead of holding Lisa accountable, my mom was now dismissing my feelings entirely. It was as though my frustration didn't matter, as though Lisa's actions were excusable simply because she was Lisa. I clenched my jaw and walked away, realizing that this wasn't just about the ceremony anymore. It was a pattern, a lifetime of Lisa getting away with anything, and I was finally fed up. The day after the wedding, I woke up with a mix of emotions. On one hand, I was thrilled to finally be married to Andrew, the love of my life. On the other, the confrontation with Lisa and the underlying tension with my mom left a bitter taste. What should have been a day filled with nothing but happy memories was now clouded by Lisa's thoughtlessness and my mom's enabling. I replayed the events in my head, trying to make sense of it. Had I been too harsh? Was I really overreacting as Lisa had claimed? But the more I thought about it, the clearer it became. This wasn't just about one incident at my wedding. It was about years of feeling overshadowed and undervalued, about Lisa consistently ignoring boundaries because she knew she could get away with it. The wedding day was simply the breaking point. Andrew, ever the supportive partner, assured me that I had done nothing wrong. "You set a boundary and she chose to cross it," he said, his voice calm but firm. "That's on her, not you." His words were a comfort, but they didn't erase the sting of knowing that much of my family would likely side with Lisa. Over the next few days, I kept my distance from Lisa and my mom. There were no calls or messages from them to apologize or even check in. Instead, I heard through the grapevine, via a cousin, that Lisa was telling people I had blown up over a small issue and made her feel unwelcome. It was infuriating but not surprising. This was classic Lisa, painting herself as the victim while downplaying the harm she'd caused. I knew I couldn't keep letting her get away with it, but I wasn't sure how to confront it without creating even more tension. A few months passed, and while things between Lisa and me weren't exactly resolved, we'd fallen into an uneasy silence. There were no apologies, no acknowledgement of what had happened at the wedding. I didn't press the issue, partly because I was exhausted by the constant family drama, and partly because I hoped some distance might help. For a while, it seemed to work. Then came the text. It was a random Thursday afternoon when Lisa messaged me. She didn't even bother with pleasantries. She went straight to the point. "Hey, I need you to watch the kids this weekend. Mike and I really need a break and Mom's busy. Can you do it?" I stared at the message, feeling a familiar pang of frustration. It wasn't a request. It was a demand. There was no, "Would you mind?" or "Do you have plans?" Just an assumption that I would drop everything to accommodate her. Normally, I might have begrudgingly agreed, but this time I didn't hesitate. I replied, "Sorry, I can't. I already have plans." Her response came quickly. "Wow, seriously? You can't cancel whatever it is for one weekend? I thought family helped family." That phrase, "family helps family," lit a fire in me. It wasn't the first time she'd used it as a weapon to guilt me into doing what she wanted, but after everything that had happened at the wedding, I was done being manipulated. I replied simply, "I'm sorry, but no." The floodgates opened. Lisa called me selfish, accused me of punishing her kids for something they didn't do, and went on about how much she and Mike deserved a break. When I didn't cave, she escalated, telling me I owed her and that I was turning my back on the family. It was the last straw. Lisa's accusations didn't stop with a few texts. Within hours, she had rallied the family into the argument, turning what should have been a personal disagreement into a full-blown family drama. My phone buzzed constantly with calls and messages, each more frustrating than the last. My mom was the first to weigh in, of course. "Lisa's been so stressed lately," she said in her usual placating tone. "Can't you just help her out this one time? You don't know how hard it is to raise 3 kids." I gritted my teeth, fighting the urge to snap. It wasn't about not understanding Lisa's struggles. It was about the principle. I'd been helping Lisa for years, sacrificing my time and energy while she barely acknowledged it. "Mom, I've helped her plenty of times," I said firmly. "This isn't about the kids. It's about respect. And after what happened at the wedding, I'm done being taken advantage of." Mom sighed heavily, the way she always did when I refused to back down. "You're being dramatic," she said, echoing Lisa's words. "Family helps family. Isn't that what we've always taught you?" It wasn't just Mom. Soon, aunts, uncles, and even cousins started chiming in. Some of them outright scolded me, while others tried to guilt me with passive-aggressive comments about staying united as a family. Each message felt like a punch to the gut. I knew they didn't fully understand the situation, but that didn't make their words hurt any less. Lisa, meanwhile, took to social media, posting cryptic updates about selfish people and how hard it is to find real support. Though she didn't mention me by name, it was obvious who she meant. The comments poured in, sympathy from her friends and thinly veiled jabs aimed at me. I was furious but refused to engage publicly. Instead, I focused on holding my ground. I wasn't going to let her or anyone else guilt me into sacrificing my boundaries again. After days of constant messages and phone calls, I reached my breaking point. It wasn't just the barrage of guilt trips. It was the realization that no matter how much I explained myself, no one in my family seemed to care about my perspective. To them, Lisa's needs always came first, and my feelings were nothing more than an inconvenience. Lisa, as expected, doubled down. She called me, her voice dripping with indignation. "I can't believe you're doing this to me," she said. "After everything I've done for you." That phrase hit a nerve. I couldn't think of a single instance where Lisa had gone out of her way to help me the way she claimed. "What have you done for me, Lisa?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. "Because all I can remember is you expecting me to drop everything for you over and over again." Her silence on the other end of the line was brief but telling. Then, she scoffed. "You're unbelievable. You're punishing my kids because you're mad at me. Do you even care about them?" It was a low blow, but I wasn't going to let her manipulate me. "I love your kids," I said. "This isn't about them. This is about you disrespecting me, time and time again. I'm not your built-in babysitter, Lisa, and I'm not going to let you guilt me into thinking I owe you something." That was the last straw for Lisa. She hung up on me, and within minutes the family group chat lit up with messages about how I was cruel and selfish. I'd officially become the villain in their narrative, and while it hurt to see how quickly they turned on me, I knew I couldn't keep letting Lisa, and by extension, my family, walk all over me. The fallout from my refusal to babysit Lisa's kids spread like wildfire through the family. It wasn't just my mom anymore. It felt like every relative had an opinion on the situation, and most of them weren't in my favor. Some called to lecture me about family loyalty, while others sent passive-aggressive texts reminding me that family should stick together. The constant barrage of criticism was exhausting, but I refused to budge. Lisa, of course, was the center of the storm. She played the victim to perfection, painting me as an ungrateful sister who didn't care about family values. According to her, I wasn't just punishing her. I was punishing her kids, innocent children who didn't deserve to be caught in the middle. It didn't matter that I had repeatedly emphasized my love for her kids. To the rest of the family, Lisa's version of events was gospel. What surprised me, though, was how quickly some relatives started siding with her without even asking for my side of the story. My Aunt Diane, for instance, left me a voicemail saying, "I raised my kids with the help of family, and I don't know how I would have managed without them. You should be ashamed of yourself." Others chimed in with similar sentiments, acting as though I was single-handedly betraying the very foundation of our family. But not everyone bought into Lisa's narrative. My cousin Sarah reached out, offering her support. "Honestly, good for you for standing your ground," she said. "Lisa's been taking advantage of everyone for years. Someone needed to call her out." Her words were a small comfort amidst the chaos, a reminder that not everyone was against me. Still, the division in the family was palpable. I was beginning to see how deep the favoritism toward Lisa really ran, and how little space there was for my feelings in a family dynamic that prioritized her needs above everything else. For the first time, I realized that this wasn't just a fight with Lisa. It was a reckoning with my entire family's expectations of me. As the days passed and the dust from the family's backlash settled, at least somewhat, I found myself reflecting deeply on what had happened. The issue with Lisa wasn't isolated. It was a symptom of a much larger pattern that I had allowed to persist for far too long. My wedding, her demands, and now the family's response were all interconnected, a web of expectations and entitlement that had always been there but now felt impossible to ignore. For years, I had played my role as the accommodating sister. Whether it was canceling plans to babysit Lisa's kids or stepping in when she needed help, I had done it without much complaint. I convinced myself that it was just what family did, even as resentment quietly built beneath the surface. It wasn't until the wedding fiasco that I truly began to see how one-sided this dynamic was. Lisa's needs were treated as paramount, while my feelings and boundaries were consistently dismissed. The backlash from refusing to babysit was, in many ways, a final confirmation of what I already knew. My family wasn't upset because I'd done something wrong. They were upset because I had disrupted the status quo. I had dared to say no, to assert myself, and that didn't fit with their expectations of me. But as uncomfortable as it was, I knew this shift was necessary. I couldn't keep bending over backward for Lisa or anyone else in the family at the expense of my own well-being. Boundaries weren't just about protecting myself from others. They were about teaching people how to treat me. It wasn't going to be easy, and it certainly wasn't going to be quick, but I was determined to stick to my decision. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was standing up for myself, and it felt empowering. As I started to unpack the deeper dynamics at play, I couldn't ignore the central role my mom had in all of this. Lisa's sense of entitlement wasn't something that had appeared out of nowhere. It had been cultivated over years of preferential treatment. My mom had always been Lisa's greatest champion, stepping in to smooth over every obstacle, no matter how minor. Growing up, it was clear Lisa was the favorite. And while I didn't fully understand the implications as a child, I felt the imbalance. Looking back, I could see the patterns clearly. When Lisa struggled in school, my mom spent endless hours helping her with assignments. When Lisa needed money for college, Mom found a way to make it work, even if it meant sacrifices for the rest of us. And when Lisa started her family, Mom became her biggest support system, always ready to babysit or help with groceries. At the time, I chalked it up to Mom simply being a loving parent. But now, it felt like she had inadvertently created a dynamic where Lisa's needs always came first, and where the rest of us were expected to fall in line. This favoritism extended to the current conflict. Instead of holding Lisa accountable for disregarding my boundaries, my mom had gone out of her way to excuse her behavior. "She didn't mean any harm," Mom had said after the wedding. "You know how hard it is for her with 3 kids." It didn't matter that my feelings had been hurt or that Lisa had broken a clear agreement. In Mom's eyes, Lisa's struggles outweighed everything else. It was a painful realization. I loved my mom deeply, but I couldn't ignore how her actions had contributed to the tension between Lisa and me. By constantly prioritizing Lisa, she had created an environment where Lisa felt entitled to everyone's time and energy, including mine. Understanding this didn't make the conflict any easier, but it gave me clarity. If I wanted to move forward, I needed to address not just Lisa's behavior, but also the family dynamics that enabled it. While the family drama raged on, my marriage with Andrew became a refuge. He was my rock throughout the entire ordeal, reminding me that it was okay to set boundaries, even if it upset others. Still, the tension was hard to escape, and I couldn't deny that it had started to seep into our relationship. Andrew was incredibly supportive, but he also hated seeing me so consumed by the conflict. "This isn't fair to you," he said one evening as we sat on the couch. "You've done everything you can to be reasonable, but it feels like they're not willing to meet you halfway. You don't have to keep justifying yourself." His words were comforting, but they also made me confront something I'd been avoiding: the emotional toll this was taking on me. I found myself replaying conversations with my mom and Lisa, searching for the perfect response that might make them see my side. It was exhausting, and it was pulling my focus away from the life Andrew and I were trying to build together. At one point, Andrew gently suggested that I step back from the situation entirely. "You're not responsible for fixing this," he said. "Lisa's behavior isn't your burden to carry." It was a perspective I hadn't fully considered, and it made me realize how much of my energy I'd been pouring into a battle that felt unwinnable. Though the conflict with my family remained unresolved, Andrew and I made a conscious effort to prioritize our relationship. We spent more time talking about our future and less time dwelling on the drama. It wasn't easy to let go of the frustration, but being with Andrew reminded me of what truly mattered. My family's approval wasn't the foundation of my happiness. Our life together was. Being labeled the good one in the family sounds like a compliment, but in reality, it's a burden that's hard to carry. For as long as I could remember, I'd been the reliable one, the one who never made waves, the one who could always be counted on to step in when needed. At first, I wore it like a badge of honor, thinking it meant I was doing something right. But now, as I reflected on the ongoing conflict with Lisa, I realized that being the good one came at a significant cost. In my family, my willingness to help was often taken for granted. Whether it was picking up the slack when Lisa couldn't manage her responsibilities or simply keeping the peace during family arguments, I was the default problem solver. It wasn't a role I had chosen. It was a role that had been assigned to me. And because I rarely pushed back, it became the expectation. The wedding fiasco and its aftermath were a wake-up call. When I refused to babysit Lisa's kids, the backlash wasn't just about that single act. It was about the disruption of a system where I was supposed to say yes, no matter how much it inconvenienced me. My refusal to fall in line was seen not just as selfish, but as a betrayal of the family dynamic. What hurt the most was realizing how little my efforts were appreciated. When I did help, it wasn't met with gratitude, but with an expectation that I'd continue to do so. And when I finally said no, the reaction wasn't understanding. It was outrage. It was as if my entire value within the family was tied to my willingness to sacrifice my own needs for theirs. Breaking free from this pattern wasn't just about saying no to Lisa. It was about reclaiming my identity outside of the good one label. I wasn't just someone who existed to serve others. I was my own person, with my own limits, and it was time to start honoring them. Letting go of the mental load wasn't easy, but it was necessary for my own well-being. As the conflict between Lisa and me continued to ripple through the family, it was clear that the drama wasn't going to stay contained. Word spread quickly among extended relatives, and soon I was fielding calls and texts from people I hadn't spoken to in months, or even years. It felt surreal to have distant cousins and second aunts chiming in on something so personal, offering their unsolicited opinions as though they were directly involved. The responses varied. Some were direct and critical, echoing the sentiment I'd already heard from my mom and others. Family is supposed to help each other. One particularly pointed message from an uncle read, "You don't turn your back on family, no matter what. That's how we were raised." The implication, of course, was that I was the one breaking the unwritten family code. Others were more subtle, reaching out with faux concern that barely masked their judgment. "I hope you and Lisa can work this out," one aunt texted. "It's so sad to see sisters fighting. Life's too short for grudges." These comments stung in their own way, as if my refusal to babysit had been reduced to petty sibling rivalry instead of a stand for my own boundaries. Not everyone was critical, though. A few relatives, mostly younger cousins, reached out to express their support. "Honestly, I don't know how you've put up with this for so long," one cousin admitted. "Lisa's been taking advantage of everyone for years." Their words were a small comfort, reminding me that not everyone in the family was blind to the imbalance. Still, the overwhelming response was one of disapproval, and it reinforced the isolation I already felt. It became clear that, to much of my family, Lisa's needs and feelings would always come first, and anyone who challenged that narrative was seen as the problem. As the noise from my family grew louder, I found myself constantly defending my decision, not just to them, but to myself. It wasn't that I doubted my stance. Deep down, I knew I was in the right. But the relentless pushback from people who were supposed to love and support me made me second-guess. Was I being too rigid? Was I really punishing Lisa's kids, as she claimed? These thoughts swirled in my head, feeding an internal dialogue I couldn't escape. Every time I replayed the events leading up to this moment, my resolve strengthened. Saying no to babysitting wasn't an act of cruelty or revenge. It was a necessary step in breaking a pattern that had left me feeling exploited and invisible. Lisa's needs had always been treated as more important than my own, and I'd spent years bending to accommodate her without expecting or receiving anything in return. My refusal wasn't about being selfish. It was about setting a boundary that should have existed long ago. Explaining this to my family, however, felt like shouting into the void. Every time I tried, I was met with the same arguments. "You're sisters. You should help each other." Or, "Lisa's got a lot on her plate. Can't you just do this one thing?" It didn't matter that I'd done countless one things for Lisa before. In their eyes, family meant endless sacrifice, and my refusal to comply made me the villain. But justifying my choices to myself felt different. It wasn't about convincing anyone else. I didn't need their validation. It was about reminding myself that I deserved respect, that my time and boundaries mattered. I wasn't Lisa's babysitter or a tool to be used whenever she needed a break. I was a person with my own life, and it was okay to prioritize that. Each time I reaffirmed this to myself, I felt a little lighter, a little more confident. I wasn't just standing up to Lisa. I was standing up for myself. Throughout the entire ordeal, one thing remained constant: my love for Lisa's kids. They were innocent in all of this, completely unaware of the family drama swirling around them. It hurt to hear accusations that I was punishing them or taking things out on them because of my conflict with Lisa. I cared deeply for my nephews and niece, and I had always enjoyed spending time with them. But the dynamic Lisa had created was one where they became both the reason and the excuse for her demands. Lisa often weaponized the kids in these situations, using them as leverage to guilt me into compliance. "Do you know how disappointed they'll be if you don't watch them?" she'd say, or, "They love spending time with you. Why would you hurt them like this?" It was a cruel tactic, one that made it difficult to separate my feelings about Lisa's actions from my affection for her children. The reality was, my refusal to babysit wasn't about the kids at all. I wanted to spend time with them, but on my terms, not as a default caretaker whenever Lisa felt overwhelmed. The problem wasn't their behavior. It was Lisa's repeated assumption that I owed her my time and energy simply because I was family. The hardest part was knowing that the kids were being dragged into this mess. They were too young to understand why their mom was angry with me, or why I wasn't around as much as I had been in the past. I hated the idea that they might think I didn't care about them, but I also knew that giving in to Lisa's manipulations wouldn't solve the underlying issue. If anything, it would only reinforce the toxic cycle I was trying so hard to break. As the days turned into weeks, the pressure from my family didn't let up. Calls and texts continued to flood in, urging me to be the bigger person and help Lisa out. It felt like a relentless campaign to wear me down, to make me question my decision over and over again. But the more I thought about it, the more resolute I became. I wasn't going to give in. Not this time. Standing firm wasn't easy. I wasn't just saying no to babysitting, I was challenging a deeply ingrained family dynamic. For years, I had been the reliable one, the helper, the one who kept the peace. Saying no now wasn't just a rejection of Lisa's request. It was a rejection of the role I had been assigned within the family. And that kind of shift doesn't come without consequences. I knew that giving in would only validate Lisa's behavior. It would send the message that she could continue to ignore my boundaries without facing any real repercussions. If I said yes this time, it wouldn't be long before the next favor was asked or demanded, and the cycle would begin again. I wasn't willing to let that happen. Instead, I focused on reaffirming my decision to myself. I reminded myself of how often I had put Lisa's needs ahead of my own, of how exhausting it had been to constantly sacrifice my time and energy without even a shred of gratitude in return. I reminded myself of how I'd felt at my own wedding, when Lisa disregarded my wishes so blatantly, and how that had been the breaking point for me. It wasn't about punishing Lisa or her kids. It was about protecting my own mental health and setting a precedent for how I deserved to be treated. I didn't need to be cruel or confrontational. I just needed to stand firm. And even though it hurt to feel so isolated from my family, I knew this was a battle worth fighting. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was reclaiming control over my own life. Just when I thought the storm might be starting to settle, Lisa ramped things up. It started with more direct texts, each one dripping with passive aggression. "It must be nice to have so much free time that you can ignore your family," she wrote one morning. "I don't know how you can sleep at night knowing how much you've hurt us." Her messages didn't stop there. She began crafting a narrative that painted me as cold and selfish, not just to the family, but to mutual friends as well. "She's changed so much since the wedding," she told one of our cousins. "I don't even recognize her anymore. It's like she doesn't care about anyone but herself." The worst, though, was how she continued to use her kids as pawns. "The kids keep asking why Auntie doesn't want to see them anymore," she said in one particularly cutting text. "I hope you're happy breaking their hearts." These tactics were textbook Lisa, turning the conversation away from her behavior and making it about how I was supposedly hurting her and her family. It was infuriating, but it was also exhausting. Each message felt like a punch to the gut, designed to wear me down and make me cave. I refused to respond. I knew engaging with her would only feed into the cycle of manipulation. Instead, I focused on staying calm and maintaining my boundaries. I blocked her on social media to avoid her passive-aggressive posts and kept my replies to her texts short and neutral. Lisa's escalation didn't surprise me, but it hurt all the same. It was a stark reminder of how far she was willing to go to protect her sense of entitlement, and how much work it would take to truly break free from the toxic dynamic she had created. In the midst of the chaos, something unexpected happened. A few family members began reaching out, not to criticize me, but to quietly express their support. It was subtle at first, a text here, a casual comment there, but it became clear that not everyone in the family bought into Lisa's narrative. One afternoon, my cousin Sarah called. "I've been watching this play out, and honestly, I'm on your side," she said. Her voice was calm but resolute. "Lisa has been doing this for years, using people, pushing boundaries. It's about time someone stood up to her." Hearing those words felt like a weight lifting off my shoulders. For so long, I'd felt like I was fighting this battle alone. But Sarah's support reminded me that not everyone was blind to the dynamic. She went on to share her own experiences with Lisa, times when Lisa had taken advantage of her kindness or guilted her into helping. "She knows how to push the right buttons to get what she wants," Sarah said. "But that doesn't mean you have to give in." Other relatives began to quietly share similar sentiments. My Aunt Laura, who had always been more distant from family drama, sent me a text saying, "I know this can't be easy, but I respect you for standing your ground. Lisa needs to learn that the world doesn't revolve around her." These small but meaningful acts of support helped bolster my resolve. They reminded me that I wasn't crazy for feeling the way I did, and that the dynamic with Lisa wasn't just in my head. Even though the loudest voices in the family were still criticizing me, these quieter affirmations gave me strength. The shift wasn't monumental, but it was enough to make me feel less isolated. It showed me that change, while slow, was possible. And even if the majority of the family still sided with Lisa, knowing that a few people truly understood what I was going through made all the difference. It gave me the courage to keep standing firm, no matter how hard Lisa and her supporters tried to tear me down. As the weeks went by, I found myself reflecting more on the idea of mutual respect, what it meant, and how it had been glaringly absent in my relationship with Lisa. In a healthy family dynamic, there's give and take, a balance where everyone's needs are considered. With Lisa, however, it had always felt one-sided. She expected support, understanding, and sacrifices from everyone around her, but rarely reciprocated them in return. For years, I'd accepted this imbalance, believing it was just part of being a good sister. I told myself that Lisa's life was harder than mine. 3 kids, a busy household, and that helping her was simply the right thing to do. But looking back, I could see how Lisa had taken advantage of that mindset. She leaned on the family so heavily that it became an unspoken rule. Lisa's needs came first. What I'd failed to recognize before was that respect is a two-way street. Supporting someone doesn't mean allowing them to disregard your boundaries. Love and respect should coexist, and one shouldn't come at the expense of the other. When Lisa brought her kids to my wedding despite my clear wishes, it wasn't just disrespectful. It was a sign that she valued her own preferences over my feelings. And when she demanded that I babysit for her, using guilt and manipulation to try to force my hand, it only confirmed how little regard she had for me as a person. These realizations were painful, but necessary. They helped me see that standing up for myself wasn't an act of selfishness. It was a demand for the respect I should have had all along. Lisa might never see it that way, but that didn't matter. I couldn't control how she acted, but I could control how I responded. And from now on, I would demand the mutual respect that every relationship, family or otherwise, should be built on. The bond between sisters is supposed to be one of love and support, but as I reflected on my relationship with Lisa, I realized it had never been as simple as that. Growing up, I idolized her. She was older, confident, and seemed to have everything figured out. I wanted to be like her, and I gladly stepped into the role of the younger sister who helped whenever she needed it. Back then, it didn't feel like a burden. It felt like love. But as we grew older, the dynamic shifted. Lisa began leaning on me not as a sister, but as a resource. Whether it was emotional support, help with her kids, or simply taking on responsibilities she didn't want, I was her go-to. At first, I didn't mind. I thought helping her was what sisters were supposed to do. But over time, I started to notice that the support was never mutual. If I ever needed help, Lisa was conveniently unavailable. If I had a problem, she'd listen, but only briefly, before steering the conversation back to herself. The wedding was the first time I had explicitly asked Lisa for something, a simple request to respect my wishes about the ceremony. Her decision to ignore that showed me how little she valued my boundaries. It wasn't about the kids. It was about control. Lisa didn't want to be told no, and she certainly didn't want to accommodate someone else's needs, even on their wedding day. Reflecting on our sisterhood, I saw a pattern that had been there all along. Lisa's behavior wasn't about love or support, it was about entitlement. And my willingness to accommodate her, time and time again, had enabled that entitlement to grow. Breaking that cycle wasn't just about saying no, it was about redefining what our relationship could be. If Lisa wasn't willing to respect me as an equal, then maybe it was time to let go of the idea of sisterhood I had been clinging to for so long. It was painful to admit, but necessary if I wanted to move forward on my own terms. In the middle of all the chaos, Andrew's unwavering support became my anchor. From the very beginning, he had been my confidant and sounding board, offering both comfort and clarity when I felt overwhelmed by the conflict with Lisa and the family. While I struggled to navigate the tangled web of obligations and emotions, Andrew had a way of cutting through the noise with straightforward logic. "You don't owe anyone an explanation for setting boundaries," he told me one evening after another heated call with my mom. "You're not being unreasonable. You're just finally standing up for yourself. That's not selfish. That's necessary." His words stayed with me, especially on the days when the guilt crept in. Andrew never tried to tell me what to do or how to handle the situation, but his quiet reassurance reminded me that I wasn't alone in this. He didn't just listen, he understood, and that made all the difference. What I appreciated most was how he supported me without adding fuel to the fire. While I vented about the family's accusations, Andrew kept me grounded, helping me focus on what truly mattered, our life together. "This is about you taking control of your own boundaries," he said. "And that's good for us too. You can't pour from an empty cup." It wasn't just words either. Andrew took steps to protect my peace. Whether it was suggesting a weekend getaway to escape the endless texts, or simply sitting with me in silence when I needed a break, his presence was a constant reminder of what a healthy relationship should look like. In contrast to the drama with my family, our marriage felt like a safe haven. Through Andrew's support, I found strength I didn't know I had. He showed me that love doesn't demand sacrifice without reciprocation. It builds you up, respects your boundaries, and helps you become the best version of yourself. Despite my determination to stand firm, guilt had a way of creeping in during quiet moments. Late at night or during an idle afternoon, I'd replay the arguments with Lisa and my mom, wondering if I was being too harsh. The phrase, "family helps family," echoed in my mind, planted there by years of unspoken expectations. Was I failing as a sister? As a daughter? The doubt was persistent, even as I reminded myself of why I had taken this stand in the first place. Lisa's manipulation only added to the weight. Her comments about the kids being hurt by my actions struck a nerve every time I thought about my niece and nephews. I hated the idea of them feeling neglected or confused, even though I knew they couldn't fully understand the situation. In my heart, I knew I loved them deeply, but Lisa's words made me question whether my actions conveyed that clearly. My mom's disappointment was another source of guilt. While I was angry with her for taking Lisa's side, I also couldn't ignore the sinking feeling that I was letting her down. Her calls were a mix of frustration and pleading, and each one ended with a reminder of how much the family needed me. It was hard not to feel like I was failing her, even though I knew she was enabling Lisa's behavior. Andrew, as always, was there to help me process these feelings. "It's okay to feel guilty," he said one evening as I vented my frustrations. "But guilt doesn't mean you're wrong, it means you care. And caring doesn't mean you have to let people walk all over you. Those words became a mantra of sorts. I started to accept that guilt and doubt were natural responses to breaking a lifelong pattern, but they didn't define the validity of my actions. Each time the doubt crept in, I reminded myself that my decision wasn't about rejecting my family. It was about redefining how I allowed them to treat me. And while the guilt didn't disappear entirely, I began to see it for what it was, a temporary feeling, not a reflection of my worth. As the dust began to settle, I realized that the dynamics in my family might never return to what they once were, and that was okay. After weeks of standing firm, I started to see subtle shifts. Lisa stopped texting me with demands, though her silence was far from amicable. My mom, while still upset, seemed to accept that I wasn't going to bend. The relentless calls and messages from extended family gradually slowed, and the house became quieter. This newfound quiet wasn't without its challenges. The absence of constant interaction with Lisa and my mom left a strange void. For so long, my identity within the family had been tied to being the helper, the one who kept the peace. Letting go of that role felt liberating, but also unsettling. I found myself wondering, who was I, if not the sister who was always there to step in? The answer came gradually. With less time spent worrying about Lisa's needs, I began focusing on my own. I threw myself into hobbies I'd neglected, spent weekends exploring new places with Andrew, and even reconnected with friends I hadn't seen in ages. These small acts of self-care reminded me that my life didn't have to revolve around family obligations. The distance also gave me space to redefine my relationships. I decided to engage with Lisa and my mom on my terms, reaching out occasionally without waiting for drama to erupt. When I did interact with them, I made sure to keep firm boundaries, avoiding situations where I might feel pressured or taken advantage of. This new normal wasn't perfect, but it felt healthier. For the first time, I was living life on my terms, not as someone else's support system, but as my own person. And that, more than anything, felt like a victory. Looking back on everything, I realized how far I had come, not just in the conflict with Lisa, but in my own understanding of self-respect. For years, I had equated being a good sister and daughter with being endlessly available, always putting others' needs above my own. It was a lesson I had absorbed without even realizing it, passed down through subtle family dynamics and reinforced by years of playing the good one. Breaking out of that role was one of the hardest things I'd ever done. Saying no felt unnatural at first, like I was betraying the very foundation of my relationships. But as I stood firm through the storm of backlash, I began to see that self-respect isn't about rejecting others. It's about refusing to reject yourself. For the first time, I was learning to value my own time, energy, and boundaries as much as I valued those of the people around me. The journey wasn't without its setbacks. Moments of guilt and doubt would still creep in, but they became easier to manage as I reminded myself of the progress I had made. Lisa's silence and my mom's lingering disappointment stung, but they no longer felt like judgments on my worth. Instead, I saw them as natural growing pains, signs that the family dynamic was shifting, even if it wasn't in the way everyone wanted. Andrew's support continued to be a guiding force. He reminded me that self-respect wasn't just about standing up to others. It was about recognizing and honoring my own needs. With his encouragement, I started setting boundaries in other areas of my life as well. At work, with friends, even in how I spent my free time. Each small act of self-respect built on the last, creating a foundation that felt stronger with every passing day. By the time the family conflict began to fade into the background, I wasn't the same person I had been when it started. I was stronger, more confident, and more in tune with what I wanted and needed. The journey had been long and painful, but it had led me to something I had been searching for all along, a sense of peace within myself. After months of turmoil, reflection, and growth, I finally felt ready to answer the question that had been haunting me since this all began. Am I the asshole for refusing to babysit and drawing a line? The answer, I realized, was a resounding no. Saying no to Lisa wasn't an act of cruelty or selfishness. It was a necessary step toward reclaiming my own life. For years, I had been conditioned to believe that my role in the family was to support others at any cost. But that expectation wasn't fair, and it wasn't sustainable. Boundaries aren't acts of hostility, they're acts of self-respect. Refusing to be Lisa's default babysitter wasn't about punishing her or her kids. It was about teaching her and the rest of my family that my time and energy have value too. Through this journey, I learned that standing up for yourself doesn't mean you don't care about others. I love Lisa's kids deeply, and I'll always be there for them in ways that feel healthy and balanced. But being part of a family doesn't mean sacrificing your own needs indefinitely. It means finding a way to support each other while respecting individual boundaries and autonomy. In the end, I'm proud of the growth I've experienced. This conflict forced me to confront patterns that I had accepted for far too long and gave me the strength to break free from them. It wasn't easy, and it wasn't without pain, but it was worth it. I've learned to prioritize my well-being, honor my boundaries, and embrace a healthier version of family, one where my voice matters too. So, no, I'm not the asshole. I'm just someone who finally decided to stand up for herself. And for the first time in my life, I'm okay with that.